But hey, it's something different.
All right, so we're officially live. Excited to have a returning guest, Mr. Myles Wakeham from BeUnconstrained.com. And so excited to have you back, Myles. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. I'm doing wonderful. Can't complain.
That's good. So yeah, let's get started a couple seconds late, but yeah, do some technical issues. We're gonna make it work. So, but it's always good to connect with you, my friend.
Absolutely, okay. It's great. I am not near you right now, so it's amazing we got this working. But I'm very happy we did.
Yes. So once again, I'm hearing the feedback on my side because I'm all messed up on my side. But anyway, we're gonna have some fun with it, man. So I'm excited to connect with you, just because you have an interesting story as far as your journey to this current position in life. So you're currently in Mexico, and so I'm curious to get your thoughts on investing, the contrarian investing standpoint in a current crisis, or I actually wanted to call it during a great reset because that's the planned agenda for the world. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. And so let's start off with just the inflation topic. So as of yesterday, especially numbers came out showing that things are running a little bit hot. We all knew that ahead of time, but it started to make itself out to mainstream news. What's your thoughts on that, man?
Well, it's interesting when you're not in the United States, you get to do that sort of outside looking in perspective on things. And you start realizing that inflation is not just a US problem. It's a problem pretty much all over the world. I think it's a problem that's pegged to any country that bases their currency on the United States dollar. I was talking with a friend of mine recently who was telling me that when you bring a car, for example, into Mexico, they charge a fee about $300 US as a kind of a deposit that allows you to have the vehicle so you can drive it around. Yeah. And then when you leave, they give it back to you. But you have the option when you come in to pay it in pesos or to pay it in US dollars. Mm-hmm. And the reason why most people actually choose US dollars is because if they would pay it in pesos, the amount of money that they pay when they come in versus the amount of money they get when they go back could be entirely different. Yeah. And that tells me that this is a country like 80% of the world that is so committed and locked down to the US dollar that God forbid the US dollar was to shift or move or fall or anything like that. It's a ripple effect that would be like dominoes that would affect the rest of the world. So, yeah, I'm concerned, as anybody would be. Inflation is real. I think a more realistic inflation number, if you're looking at it on the ground for most people, is probably 8 to 10%. I look to, indexes like Chapwood Index and things like that to actually tell me their take on it. But I believe clearly those are the numbers. And I think, to be honest, we're being lied to. We're being absolutely played as fools by the government and the Federal Reserve in regards to what inflation is. And the reason is simple. They've got $30 trillion of short-term debt. And God forbid they put the interest rate up on it, because that would just make it so impossible for them to ever get anywhere near even the promise of a surplus. And at the end of the day, we're living in the world of, the country's running on credit cards and the banks design everything.
Yeah, good point. Now, the whole topic of inflation is nothing new. It's been around. I look at it in different ways. The depreciation of the dollar over time is a result of the inflation built into the current mandate of the Federal Reserve. And so we're told 2% per year is what they're shooting for, and they haven't been able to find that due to the faulty metric that you've mentioned. It's out there. So I wonder why now are they allowing it to become a prevalent subject matter when it's been there all along. Look at the housing prices, the stock market bubble, the student loan debt bubble. So inflation has been prevalent on certain areas, but now it's in the manufacturing consumer goods sector. Is that a part of their agenda to usher in this reset a lot faster, you think, or what?
Well, if you look at the average annual budget for, say, for example, defense, which is approximately $600 billion a year. If that's what you're paying for the entire national defense of supposedly the world's largest military, and then you calculate the value of interest on a $30 trillion debt load, it's very, very easy to surpass the US military budget just in interest payments. So you don't want anything that could even suggest the Federal Reserve raising interest. And if the Federal Reserve, by way of a, for lack of a better term, a cartel relationship with the Treasury, obviously they don't want to raise interest, not because they want people to be all happy and go into debt, buy a new car and get 0% financing and all that sort of stuff. They don't care about any of that. They only care about the fact that when they actually have to go and pay the interest on that money, that it's going to exceed it'll be the largest line item on the expense profit and loss statement for the country. No. And we're running at such a loss right now that I can't see how we could ever recover from that. So this is a way of avoiding the imminent collapse of something at an epic level, because you're playing with the largest expense line item on the budget of the United States.
Very true, very true. So so I'm hearing in the chat here, have some feedback. So I want to switch to a different mic. So hopefully that helps, but maybe it doesn't. So, but anyway, I'll keep my questions quick and short. Investing. So Contrarian investing. Give us your thoughts on, given this reset is the destination, how does the concept of investing change, or how should it change when the currencies will be the underlying problem for everybody globally, in your opinion?
Well, I think the biggest thing that's affecting a lot of this is the geopolitical nature of the balance of trade and where trade is coming from. Obviously, if you walk into any Walmart, it's pretty obvious that pretty much 99% of the stuff sitting on the racks is all made in China. And the reality is that our corporations have effectively sold us out on a kind of a trade imbalance with China that benefits China and does not benefit us. We're not an economy in the United States where we actually produce anything. I look at it from a simple average family's budget perspective, and that is, if you're not bringing in more money than you're consuming, you're going to the credit card to fund it all. Yeah. And the United States, the nature of the economics of the United States is it's a transactional economy that's based on not producing, but all consumption. And so the only way of actually coming up with a balance for that, if you don't have a labor force which is producing a service output which exceeds the consumption, is to put it on the credit card. And the credit card happens to be our national debt. Now, we're doing that because we outsourced our manufacturing to China. Well, on the surface, one could say, well, globalism, what are you going to do, right? We've been doing that for 20 years. And they can do things cheaper than we can, so be it. We are benefiting from cheaper priced products, and phones are cheaper and computers are cheaper and so on. One would argue against that, particularly in the case of inflation. But I would also suggest that why on earth are we doing business with a communist authoritarian regime? There's a simple basic fact that, and this is something that I noticed as an Australian living in the United States. My own home country fell into this trap for 20 years where they basically sold all of their resources, where most of the majority of their resources were being bought by one customer, and that was China. Well, you know what happens when you're running a business? You have one customer. Who controls the business now? Is it you? Right. Or is it the customer? It's the customer. And what happens is Australia just gave up every bit of control it had to one customer, to China. And then in 2015 they had a fallout. Now China won't take any of their exports with the exception of iron ore. China is geopolitically completely shunned the country. They've pulled out. Australia is right on the verge of cancelling a bunch of contracts they have with China on things like the Port of Darwin. The China Belt and Road Initiative's been cancelled. And they're kind of enemies now. The reality is now that the people are suffering because the farmers, they can't get anybody to buy their lobsters, their wine, their wheat, their barley, their beef. They have to look for alternative markets. In the United States, we haven't done that yet. I see Australia as being kind of the canary in the coal mine here. At some point, the United States will choose to not deal with China. And when that happens, then your inflation will go through the roof. Because if you can't get a T-shirt for 50 cents from some Chinese manufacturer, and you're paying $5, which is probably the real price of the material, it's going to hurt, and it's going to hurt the average consumer. And the only way of countering that inflation is going to be raising interest rates. We're very precarious right now. If China were to choose to do what it's threatened to do, and that is to attack Taiwan and to take it back, and we respond to that with military aggression, all bets are off, all trade is gone, and our inflation goes through the roof. So we are sitting on a very, very thin, tight wire right now.
Wow. So, okay, so you open up a couple cans of worms there. So international trade is at the bedrock of the monetary system currently, and it's very fragile. And the U.S. is, I come across very little that says made in the USA. And so as of now, how long to get some type of infrastructure up and running to get our basics, back in production here? Is that something that will have to happen, or you think the U.S. is trying to avoid that by potentially having to buddy up with China at some point?
Well, it's interesting. I was watching Bloomberg before I came down here to Mexico, and I was watching an article where they were saying, it was kind of one of those spin sort of articles where they were basically saying, oh, don't worry, we're great with China. Everything's fine. We're never going to have fallout. We're always going to be buddies, and everything's good. Don't panic. And I look at that and go, no. The reality is we're not. And what we need to do is we need to take a leaf out of the Europeans' book. The reason why I'm actually down here in Mexico, other than to enjoy the wonders of a great place with fantastic food and all of the lovely, tourist options that we get here, is I'm looking at cities down here that are the fastest growing cities in Latin America. And those cities are growing because of supply chain disruption that now means that products that you will buy in Walmart may not actually be manufactured in China anymore, that may be made right here in Mexico. Now, we've been doing that a long time for things like the automotive industry, but we're now seeing it occurring in many, many other product forms. Before I left, I had to do some work in my garden. I was doing some irrigation work with the little irrigation lines and the bubbler sprinklers and so on. And all of those products I picked up at Home Depot, as one would do. And I looked at the manufacturer, and it happens to be a company called Rainbird. Well, Rainbird are based in Tucson, Arizona. And when I look at the product and I see where it's made, it's all made in Mexico. If you start looking at where everything else is being made, for example, Volkswagen, every Volkswagen car in North America and in Mexico is made in Puebla here in Mexico. They have a $4 billion investment, and 85% of their output is exports to the North American market. Just recently, General Motors put $1 billion down here into Mexico to build EV batteries. So they've got a battery plant here. They're trying to compete with Tesla. Mercedes Daimler put, I think, $2 billion into Guadalajara to build commercial vehicles. So every time you see one of those Amazon vans on the road with the Mercedes logo on the front, made in Guadalajara. The reality is that we are replacing China manufacturing for Mexico manufacturing. This will take time. Corporations have to reinvest. When corporations have to reinvest and the shareholders don't get so much of a return that year, guess what? They don't like that. They would prefer the Bloomberg spin to say it's all fine. We're staying with what we've got because we can milk the profits from this. I'm saying that is a short-term stupid idea. And at some point, China does one bad thing that we don't agree with, and we're forced to go into some sort of a battle in the South China Sea or Taiwan or anything like that. The people, the smart money will be down here in Mexico making deals, building factories, doing warehousing, building distribution routes and supply chain networks, and repurposing and resupplying the United States with products and services to avoid the inevitable inflation that will come from that disruption.
So how does the new NAFTA or the deal Trump set in place? They rebranded from NAFTA to something else. I forgot what it is. But how is that still in effect, or will you think its current administration look to dial back on that, because Biden seems pressed to undo everything Trump did? And what Trump did beneficial, you think?
Well, NAFTA was originally a Clinton project.
Correct.
So I don't think that the Democrats are as negative towards it as one might think. I do know under the previous administration, there was a move to begin creating what they called the North American Union, which would be a version of the EU that would cover Canada, the US, Mexico, and probably some Caribbean areas as well. I think that's off the table. The nationalistic pride of the United States didn't want to succumb to a union in which the lowest common denominator would become the basis of everything. And that's typical of what Britain did with the Brexit move, where they didn't want to take on the burden of nations like Greece and Italy and Spain, in which they had a massive debt load. They didn't want that to become theirs, so they went ahead and broke from that. I think the United States would not join a union at that level. However, the USMCA, as a trade agreement, allows them to be able to partner with Mexico as if it was an extension of themselves. Now, there are always going to be tariffs and taxes. There's always VAT that Mexico imposes on their own output as well. And so that's normal, but at least we have the potential of a friendly agreement for production. And the way I look at it, if you look at Canada as a massive country full of raw material, and you look at Mexico of 115 million workers that are willing to work hard at much lower rates than we are, and the United States is a transactional consumption market, it's the perfect trilogy. What you need to do is to be able to get the raw material from north down to Mexico for manufacturing, and the finished goods back up to the United States. It's all about supply chain. And that's why me as a contrarian investor down here right now is to look for opportunities within the supply chain.
Interesting. So we are streaming live with Myles Wakeham. I'm sorry, my audio is starting to bother me. But feel free in the chat to ask questions, and I'll definitely deliver them to them. And so I have a gang of questions myself. And so as we move through, I'll hopefully answer questions for you, Myles. But the average investor here in the U.S. especially, it's usually someone who has been very patiently waiting in anticipation for buying now and being able to get returns down the line, a typical 60-40 split. And in this current environment now, I don't think that model is no longer applicable given the circumstances we're up against. So in your opinion, looking for opportunities in the future, you said you're in Mexico looking for opportunities and whatnot. How should your average person look at taking advantage of if they have no information or resource, they don't know how to do any of that as far as just opening up their radars for opportunities? How would you recommend they begin?
For me, it's boots on the ground. I need to come down to a place and touch and feel it. I'm old school like that. I think that the thing that being raised in a country like Australia, everything is an obvious transactional event. You could go out in the backyard, dig something up out of the ground and sell it to somebody, and that's how you make your money. And there's a physical association with that. You can physically touch the raw material, the goods that are manufactured, and the transaction is directly peer-to-peer. Everything works. It's simple, pure free market, all of that stuff. That's Austrian economics to its finest, and it works well. The problem is when you start involving third parties, counterparties like futures contracts, Wall Street brokers, commodities brokers, and all of a sudden they're all trying to make a cut here and there. It all gets completely confused. And it's interesting to know that the greatest right now, currently the largest business export industry in Mexico, I should say the largest industry in Mexico by GDP, is not the things that you would normally think about it as fuel, petroleum, tourism, maybe finished goods manufacture. It's not that. It's remittances. It's the ability for Mexico to take money from the United States when people who are in the United States working send money back for their family. They are carving 27% off the top for every dollar that Jose in the fields in California on a farm is making, and he wants to send it back to Maria, who lives in Mexico City or whatever. He's losing 27% on the dollar just trying to make that transaction work. That money is becoming the largest industry here in Mexico. There's an opportunity to destroy that. But the Mexican people don't trust the government, they don't trust banks, and they only want to deal in cash. So the obstacle is to get past that. As far as opportunities down here go, the way of thinking per your question, I look at it from the point of view that if I play the game by looking at what the mainstream media, even the business media, the CNBCs, the Bloomberg and so on, will tell you about that they think there's opportunity buying this or buying that. No, I don't listen to that. I get down on the ground and I look at actually what's going on. I look at the manufacturing up here on the hill. I'm not sure you can hear it in the background, but they're manufacturing luxury condominiums here in San Miguel de Allende, which where I am right now. The opportunities here are enormous. The pricing is still affordable. And this is a place where I can find wealth because I look at what's going to be coming down the line. I skate to where the puck is going for the Canadians. And that's really the secret. I would suggest that one could look at supply chain disruption. And if you believe, as I do, that we are going to detach from China for our supply chain, we are going to reattach down here. And if you know that's coming and you know that's 2, 3, 4 years from now, an investment in anything that has something to do with that supply chain will work. Case in point, the largest railroad manufacturer or the railroad here in Mexico, the biggest ownership is not actually owned by Mexican interests. It's owned by Kansas Rail, Kansas Southern. Kansas Southern owns this Mexican rail route. It's just interesting to note that Canada Pacific Rail is trying to buy them big time. Connect the dots. Why would you do that? Because you've got to get finished goods from here into the United States, and they want the means of access. They want the distribution mechanism for themselves. Plus, they can interconnect Canada Rail with Mexico if they own the rights of the whole run all the way through. So if I was an investor, this is probably a bit late for most people, but if you know these things because you are on the ground and you see this sort of stuff, one would have bought Kansas Southern, right? It's not financial advice, but I'm saying it makes sense. And maybe one would buy Canada Pacific Rail or Canada Rail. Check the numbers because I'm not sure of the exact ticker symbols, but it's giving you an example of how you can see the future if you participate on the ground in what's happening. But if you're looking at life through a smartphone, and if you're looking at life through a TV set, and you're trusting the pundits on Bloomberg and CNBC and so on, it ain't going to end well for you. I'm not a believer in what I guess we call herd-based investing. When the herd go one way, I go the polar opposite, and that's worked out so much better for me. I probably make 10 to 100 times return doing that compared to what herd mentality does.
Interesting. So from that, I got, look for disruption, because usually disruption is somebody else tinkering with new opportunities that you could possibly take advantage of earlier on before it become mainstream. Because once it becomes mainstream and your experts on TV tell you that it's a great opportunity, it's already too late because everybody already got in at the bottom. Now, one of the things you start off with, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when I was a kid, I used to go surfing a lot. And one of the things that you'd always learn was that if you wanted to know which beach to go to, you needed to buddy up and get some local knowledge. So you make a phone call to the guy you know who's down on the beach somewhere. It saves you an hour-long drive because he'll tell you whether the waves are there or not. The secret is to make those contacts and to be involved and get down there and befriend them and take them out to lunch and dinner and make sure that they befriend you and you're part of that group, you're part of that circle, and all of a sudden all the information comes to you. You're not going to make money on a smartphone, I can guarantee it.
Interesting. One of the things you mentioned, you started off with talking about the payment remittances as being one of the biggest issues between the U.S. and Mexico because of the high percentage cut that goes to the government, I'm sure. How will that be solved? Because people don't have banks, they don't trust banks, they love cash. Cash is the peso eventually is going to become more trash, Ray Dalio code or whatever. And so where is the opportunity in that, you think?
Well, it's a very kind of agrarian economy still here. I mean, we were at the Mercado here yesterday looking at getting some fruit and vegetables, go to the butchers and so on. And you're dealing with the guy who grew it in the ground. And when you look at that process of transaction and you look at the intent that the grower has to sell you their corn or their, avocados or whatever they've grown, you could easily say to them, how about I give you, half a pig for these vegetables, or, find some equivalence in terms of value. And they would love that because they got to eat. They would prefer to not use pesos and dollars and transactional currencies as a means of exchange if they could. The fact is they have a hard time working out valuation equivalence. So Therefore, we fall back to the basic acceptable form, and that would be currency. But yeah, it's totally cash down here. Everything's cash. This is an 80% shadow economy. That cash that you get, it's not declared for taxes. It's kept in the family. It's buried in the backyard. But also remember that this is not an economy on debt. No one has a mortgage here. You buy your house with cash. If anybody's coming down here to buy real estate, bring cash, because you cannot get a mortgage. I mean, you can try, but it's not going to be something you'll want.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all a cash economy, and with that, you get stability. So when COVID happened, and like cities like this shut down, it didn't affect too many people, because although the workers may not have been able to go out there and work anymore, they went back home because it was a home that's been in the family for 100 years. They've got deed in the house. There's no debt. Maybe they have to eat rice and beans for a while, but the reality is they accepted it. There was no stimulus. There was no government intervention. They just they rode it out, and now everything's coming back here. They're back on the streets, and they're driving the Ubers and the taxis, and they're selling the products, and they're getting back to normal. Mm-hmm. They take the government intervention out. They stabilize the economy. Everything works.
Interesting. Now, in the area you're in now, as far as, because of course Hugo Salinas Price, been a silver advocate forever, basically telling the Mexican government they need to implement silver back into the equation. So I know the mining sector there is probably booming or experiencing some growth there. What do you see on the ground from what you study? Anything in the mining sector there? Do you keep an eye on that?
Yeah, silver is big here. I'm in San Miguel de Allende, which is in the state of Guanajuato. Guanajuato and Guanajuato City is probably the center of silver mining in Mexico. Mm-hmm. You can go down to the local markets here. They have a big thing on Saturday, and all the local people come and you can buy anything in silver. It's like they've taken the product right out of the ground and turned it into the necklaces and the bracelets and all those things to sell to the tourists. And you see it right there and then. Yeah, silver's big here, and it's nothing stopped. It's still being mined. It may not be mined at the levels it was a long time back, but it's still an important part of the economy of this region.
Interesting. Now, you're a real estate guy. What are you seeing as far as what's your viewpoint on all the recent Biden taxes that's being thrown out there on the U.S. real estate? Will that be problematic and force more people abroad, you think, to look for ways to secure their wealth?
If anything, I think it'll slow down the expatriation of people in the United States. Most other, with the exception of Western countries, for example, like Australia and New Zealand and Europe and so on, where mortgages can be obtained if you have some form of residency or some form of maybe citizenship or history within that region, you could go to the local region and buy real estate with debt if you wanted. But these areas, such as Latin America and so on, there's an all cash deal. So the way that people would typically look to buy outside of their country would be to sell what they had in the United States. Mm-hmm. And if you've been sitting on a piece of property that's gone up significantly in value, maybe you have some rental real estate or some investments, and then you're looking down the barrel at if this thing's worth more than $1 million, or if my depreciated gain on this is going to be more than $1 million, it may well be not worth selling. Mm-hmm. You could be looking at 40-50% of that going straight to Uncle Sam. So I think that what people will end up doing is trying to take advantage of low interest rates, and they'll start HELOCing their real estate rather than selling it. If you think about the problems we've got right now as a society, if you look at Forbes numbers, 78% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. People can't afford to retire. And you look at why they've got these crappy jobs. They're going and working, 60 hours a weekend and hating the boss and hating the commute, and they're not free. They're not able to be, living their life to the fullest. The reality is it's because they sold their future out to debt. And my biggest concern is that the whole Biden capital gains tax is a boom to the banks. The banks will see this as a way that they can extract more interest out of people's existing wealth. In fact, it's really just a wealth exchange, because people can't afford to sell, so they'll lean their property to a bank heavily. We can only hope the bank doesn't come calling for the money. But when they lien that property for the bank, they're making interest payments to the bank. They're keeping the banksters rich forever. And that's a wonderful thing. So I can only assume that if one was to use that as a means of taxation, that maybe it wasn't on the surface its intended point, and that was to try to reflate the economy and bring in money in the budget. What I'm thinking is, if a country has the ability to print its own money, why do we have taxes at all? That argument needs to be, at least, no one wants to make that statement. If I was to make that statement on YouTube, I'd probably be shut down and demonetized. But the reality is, I spoke to my accountant about this, because I'm no magic finance guy. I'm no macroeconomic wonk or anything. I'm just a guy on the ground, sees things for what they are, makes investments, and I do okay at it. But I asked my accountant about it, and he came back and he goes, Myles, I don't know the answer to that. I have no idea why we tax people if we can print money. Because ultimately, when we devalue the dollar, isn't that tax?
Yeah, I think it served its purpose, the idea of taxing income, very well in the beginning of the Federal Reserve creation, 1913-ish, into the industrial age boom, but it's ran its course now. And so now they're looking to rebrand the entire monetary system. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on the CBDCs and the likelihood of it being directly deposited at some point to your QR on your app, phone, from Treasury or Fed. So we're into a whole new monetary system now. So taxation might be done differently, because I believe it's going to be taken out of your account automatically in your CBDC dollars or whatever. Give us your thoughts on that. And will something like that ever make its way to Mexico, you think, given that people don't trust the banking sector the way we do here in America, U.S.?
I do not think it would come here to Mexico. I don't think the government here can be organized enough to implement something at scale on that basis. They're nice people, but the government here is inept. That's why you have drug cartels. The reality is the government doesn't really do anything more than get in the way of things. And I think people don't treat them with the level of authenticity that they probably should. Having said that, the way I look at it is that we are living in one big Black Mirror episode right now. We have used technology as a weapon against ourselves. We are no longer using it as a tool to help us. We are using it as a tool to enslave us. And the reality is, if you look at government motivation, the truth is, if you're in power in government, you don't need money. You've probably got more than enough money waiting for you from lobbyists and all the outside interests when you leave. And you've probably got more than you need. You're all covered. You don't have any issue. You're not scraping money together to pay for food or pay your health insurance or whatever. You're cool. What's your real motivation? It's power. It's power, it's control, and ultimately those that have the greatest desire for these things turn to totalitarianism to try and do that. Thankfully, that hasn't occurred yet. But what I am seeing is that if you use technology as a weapon and you disrespect the privacy of the individual, of the citizen, and you disrespect the ability of the citizen to be able to have anonymous transactions in any form, because you don't trust cash, you think cash is used for money laundering and terrorism and all that, and then you say, well, look, now they're all going after Bitcoin or Monero or some other currency which is deadly towards our government power intervention. The easiest thing you can do, you take a leaf out of Turkey's book, you take a leaf out of India's book, you take a leaf out of Bangladesh's book, and you basically blacklist all of that, and you replace it with the government coin. And they look at China and they go, China's got this digital yuan. We can't be beaten by China. Okay, is that your excuse for how you want to enslave your nation? Because that, to me, is a pretty damn poor excuse. For a country which is supposed to be freedom-loving, that I came and signed up for a constitution because I wanted that freedom, and I came to that country and I found it disrespected like that. It's horrible. And I know I'm probably going to get a lot of people upset by saying that. But the reality is, look, where's our free market gone? It's oligarchs, right? And what are we turning to if we turn away from the free market? We're turning to totalitarianism. We're turning to what, for example, if you look at the history of regions like, say, the Czech Republic, when they were under USSR dominance. Do you want to live like that? I don't.
Right.
And so I want to come to a place which maybe has a really inept government. That's part of the reason I'm here. but at least have a bug out plan for it. And I might sound a bit kind of Doug Casey-ish, but you know what? I get it. You know, at some point, how do you pay back $30 trillion of debt? You have to force it upon the people. And how do you actually stop the people from having a life and having a future when you've taken away their debt? I mean, I'll give you a great example, and this will freak people out. A few months back, the CDC published their life expectancy numbers for the average US male in the United States. Now, I had looked at these numbers and I was basing a whole bunch of interesting sort of demographic numbers and statistics, investment planning and whatever, based on what I thought was the US life expectancy. An average US life expectancy in 2016 was 79.3 years. Now, significantly lower than Canada, Western Europe, even some parts of Latin America. And I looked at that and thought, well, if this is the number, how much money do you need to have saved away when you retire to be able to get to what the average statistical life expectancy is? And look, I know there's people out there, well, my Uncle John, he's 95 and still kicking. Sure, but how many people out there died when they were at 50s? And they offset and balance these things out. Well, the average was 79.3. This year, the CDC republished their life expectancy numbers. 75. In literally 5 years, we lost 5 years of life.
Yeah.
And one could say, oh, yeah, but Myles, that's COVID. We lost 500,000 people to COVID. So I said, okay, that's a reasonable argument. Let's look at 2019 numbers. 76. So 76 to 79 is 3 years over a 4-year span. We're losing 1 year of life expectancy per year. If we don't stop this, we'll all be dead. But here's the thing. Your government is saying to you, I'll get you Social Security, but I'll tell you what, we haven't got that much money because we haven't been taking much in taxes or some other BS. And they'll say to you, 67 now. You get your 67, we'll get you Social Security.
Yeah.
Do the math. If 75 is your life expectancy and you're taking Social Security at 67, you got 8 years to enjoy that money, buddy. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to get out there and go to Monaco when I'm 50. I'm not going to go buzzing around the Colosseum in Rome when my back's hurting me because I haven't got that much time left. So forget bucket lists. Do it now.
Yeah, that changes everything, man. So I'm thinking like when you were describing those numbers there, I'm thinking like, I wonder what gave them those. What gave them that data to come up with those numbers? And the first thing came out was stress. Like over the last year, especially stress, I'm sure has skyrocketed to where that's played in a lot of illnesses on top of the whole, pandemic situation. So, and it's only gonna get worse because finances tend to be a very heavy burden on a lot of people, especially if it's centered around their own work and their own labor, because a lot of people are being challenged right now due to the fact they're not able to allow their money to work for them and invest and things like that. So, wow, it definitely changes it should change your perspective about the concept of retiring in the future, because with the debt we have, all the disruption and the reset that's planned, will nothing work out according to your plan unless you make some adjustments now. So, wow.
It's hard to not sound like a conspiracy theorist when you talk about factual statistical data. That's what's really sad. Because at the end of the day, you think about all of the financial services industry that wants you to put your money away in IRAs and 401ks, and they're going to play the casino game with the money, and they're going to make their profits on the arbitrage and so on. And then you start realizing they want you to do this perpetually till the day you die. And all of a sudden you start wondering, well, maybe I don't want to be working much longer than, say, 55, maybe 60, because these numbers are starting to scare me a little bit. Maybe I've got to watch out for what I eat, go to the gym more often, all these sort of basic things. These things are directly connectable to our macroeconomic situation and inflation and our dollar and all the other things. They're all interconnected because we are, to the banking industry, like nodes on the matrix. We're sort of there. They're sucking the energy out of us. And the longer they can do that, the richer they become. And that does sound really, conspiratorial, but it's not.
But
what lasts longer than government administrations? Banks.
Hey, good point. So once again, for those tuning in, we'll get ready to dive back in a minute. I missed a lot of questions earlier in our discussion, so I'm gonna go back to them. And so if you also have questions just joining in, feel free to ask your questions and I'll get them out to you. And let me see here. So sorry for the audio on my side, having issues, but it says the manufacturing boom already happened in the early 2000s, then went to China. Won't this happen again? Assuming we're talking about Mexico, I'm not sure, but what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's no doubt that companies have to recapitalize their factories here. And that's going to mean that they're going to have to come back here, buy land and develop partnerships and do that. I am about a 45-minute drive around from the largest or fastest growing, I guess you would call it city. It's a small city, but it's a city called Querétaro. And in Querétaro, it's the fastest growing city in Latin America right now. And it's mainly because of European companies that have come in here and established manufacturing base. Companies like Bosch, even a lot of Korea, like Samsung's big here. Goodyear's big here. These are companies that have bought up large tracts of land and they're reestablishing their manufacturing in their factories here. They're doing it different than they did back in the 2000s because now they've got robotics, they've got automation. So the investment in the robotics is going to drive down the price of robotics in factory automation, reduce the need for manual labor, of course, and then it's going to become a far different kind of an economic principle than it was 20 years ago. So whereas China are doing everything they possibly can to get the technology of robotic manufacturing and make sure that they own it, the key thing here is that we still are in a wonderful position where US technology licensing and interest in intellectual property stays in the United States, and all they've got to do is actually make that stuff right here in Mexico, use the labor force here, ship it up, and we're good to go again.
Okay, so here's another question. This is a while back. It says, do you believe the U.S. holds its own debt? If yes, how much?
I'm sorry, the first part of that question again?
It says, do you believe the U.S. holds its own debt? If yes, how much?
And in terms of debt, are we talking about what's on the books? Or
I'm assuming what's on the books, yes. That's just a question for Tom.
What's on the books? So they're looking at what they say 28 trillion, but we all know they've been spending like drunken sailors right now. So we're probably looking at somewhere around 35 if we spread that out, and then that will increase organically. Is that too much? Hell yeah. It's too much. And we don't even talk about the 147,000 trillion of unfunded future liability here as well. If you go to like usdebtclock.org and have a look at those numbers, then it starts getting real, and you start understanding. We're in deep doo-doo here. I don't know how we get out of it, and that's something that I don't know. I think the only way is you've got to reset the currency.
Yeah, and it's amazing to me how most people are unaware of the total on the books as well as unfunded, and they never associate themselves with it and how it will impact their future. Like that disconnect between like I'm living comfortably, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, I'm working hard, saving for retirement, but then my government has already piled up more than they can ever give account for. How will that impact my future? Getting people to link those two together has been very difficult on my part. And trying to get people to rethink beyond the dollar. So it amazes me like how people are so oblivious to the financial future. It's already been spent. It was spent a long time ago. So, yeah.
Well, you know the old story about the frog in the pot of boiling water, right?
Yeah.
How you put a frog in a pot and, the water's cool and the frog just sits there and gradually sort of turn up the heat. The frog doesn't notice and he just keeps going and he's sitting there and eventually he dies because the heat hits boiling point. By then he didn't realize it and boom, it's too late. Yeah. That's the problem we've got right now. We're all sitting in that pot of boiling water and you can choose to stay in there or you can choose to get out. It's up to the individual.
Yeah. Here's another question. Here it says, assuming about retirement, it says, I wonder if I can have my retirement deposited in Mexico.
Well, that's interesting.
In a bank or what, but yeah.
Well, one thing I've done personally is I use self-directed IRAs to gold. And I just have all of my, the money I care about, I keep in precious metals. And I do it, unfortunately, because it's an IRA, I can't touch it till I'm 59 and a half. And so many missed opportunities have come along since then because I stupidly chose to go down that path with some of my wealth.
Mm-hmm.
But I also believe that you can probably just, I mean, a lot of people will argue maybe even take the hit and pull it out and buy it now. I'm not saying do that, but there's no reason why an IRA can't be moved into a self-directed one and then shifted into alternative asset classes.
Yeah. I've had some gentlemen on before talk about that as an option, and it contradicts the narrative that we were always taught growing up. You know, put it in the financial advisor's hands, let him handle it. They know what's best. So that whole idea of self-education, people taking matters into their own hands, has never been more important right now. All right, so as we get ready to wrap this up, I'm curious to get your thoughts on. You hinted at automation a little bit. And so the future labor force is being rebranded as well. Automation, AI, and all that's coming. And then you have entrepreneurship, being able to create for yourself and look for opportunities, disruptions in the market, and invest in them early. Give us some thoughts on how people can become more self-reliant in the days ahead, given the fact that so much around us is changing. How would you? What's some steps you would give people to consider or take into their consideration?
Well, it's interesting. I had a discussion with a friend of mine recently about this. He's a strong believer in looking at history of how empires have come and gone and how technology has played into that. I've had a long career in technology. I was a software developer in my past. I did it for about 40 years before I kind of broke free of that. So I know the inside baseball world of this. What I can tell you is that the rate of, say, we look at something like Moore's Law, where computers are doubling in power every 18 months or so. If we project that out, it doesn't take very long before we start realizing that the machines exceed our ability individually, the singularity principle and so on. We're getting closer to that, very close, unfortunately. I think that anybody who is looking at technology to help them or to support them in terms of their future and their economic wealth, and they might be putting their faith and trust in things like cryptocurrency, I would be very, very wary right now, really, because I think that, well, let me tell you a little bit of story about that. When I started writing software for people, they told me what they needed. And I had to become really good at being an analyst, at understanding requirements, what people wanted, and be able to ask leading questions and probe and get to the essence of what they really needed. In about 1995, I started realizing that didn't work anymore. And that's because we had this thing called the internet. And when the internet came, the customers that we used to have, that I used to have, they didn't know what they needed anymore because they couldn't predict the future. They didn't know about Amazon.com or eBay.com or Facebook or anything like that. Those things were like science fiction to them. What we did with that transition was we said to the technologists, you now call the shots. You now tell us what we're going to be as a society. Now, if you know anything about technologists, you know, they're the nerds. They're the kids in the high school that kind of got beaten up in the corner and, you know, had very, very little social skills, and were extremely, extremely bad at understanding humans. Now, that's not all of them. I'm being very generalized here, but the reality is we've said to the nerds, you control the future of humanity, and we will just succumb to that. We'll use your tools. We'll use your Facebook, your Twitter, your Twitch, your Snapchat, your Instagram. We'll use these things. They'll become part of our lives. You control the narrative now. You control the platform. We are at your mercy. And when that happened, society lost its direction. And somehow we have to regain that back. Right now, we sit on a precipice where the nerds are now controlling the robots, the AI, and more importantly, the big data. The ability we're giving them to predict the future and to define the future. We have to realize whether we want or trust them to do that, and whether or not we think that they are ethical and completely moral in doing that. I would ask the question, why are there so many people skeptical of people like Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and now Elon Musk? Because these are the people that we empowered to define our future with. We told them, we don't need to tell you what we want, you tell us. And now we're at their mercy, and now they're the bad guys. So we have to as a society, we have to think our own actions here a little bit if we want to regain some sort of control of our future. But the technology, the robotics, artificial intelligence, big data, it's coming. And if we don't take care of ourselves and make sure that we also have a right to having a rich and meaningful life, and that it's not about what the robots do, and it's not about what's going on our smartphone, it's about us as humans. We make good interactions with each other. We get back to basics. We go out, we shake each other's hands. We have lunch together. We communicate and we connect as humans. We might have hope. But if we don't do that because we're scared to leave the house or we're scared to walk away from the phone, that scares me very much. And I have a daughter. She's looking at that future for herself, and I am scared to death for it. I think human services is about the only hope she might have.
Yeah, wow. And so, yeah, of course, all parents definitely should be concerned because everyone's children in this generation grew up and having access to something at all times to be able to scroll and tell them. And so, yeah, critical thinking and a lot of other things is lost when you stare at a screen all the time. So I've had issues as a parent with that as well. So as we get ready to wrap it up, I appreciate you, Myles, for joining us and sharing your insights and what you're seeing on the ground there in Mexico, as well as what the future could hold. Last thing I want to get your answer on is this cryptocurrency blockchain space that is now taking front and center in all of our lives. It's a digital asset class now. Banks are excited. And I've been skeptical all along, and it's here to stay. As a software guy, computer guy, the Bitcoin code in of itself and everything built underneath it, all the other chains, do you see quantum computers being able to next couple of years disrupt that? Is there anything that can bring down Bitcoin? We got the Michael Saylor saying that it's immutable, it's godlike, it's 100 years from now, all that stuff. Give me your thoughts.
Wow. So full disclosure, I bought Bitcoin in 2011 when it was $7 each. I bought a lot of it. I sold it, majority of it, in about 2018, and I made a killing. So I was very, very happy. And for the first 4 or 5 years about Bitcoin, you couldn't shut me up about it. I was that annoying guy telling everyone, go and buy Bitcoin, right? Why? Well, because I saw what it could do for humanity. I could see the 8 billion or times 7 billion people on planet Earth and how 3.5 billion of those were unbanked. I saw this as a way to take the counterparty out of the transaction. I saw it as a way where you could stop censorship, where you could actually have people who could transact without a bank saying, no, you may not use PayPal. No, you may not use Visa or MasterCard. This to me was like something for humanity that made humanity better. In about 2017, I got my doubts about that. And the thing that the straw that broke the camel's back, although there was all those scams like BitConnect and all that stuff that was going on, if people remember back then, the straw that broke the camel's back was I looked at where Bitcoin mining was being done. And you can do this yourself. You can go, and there are many websites that will tell you what regions of the country or of the world where Bitcoin mining is being done. Now, mining is important because every single transaction that hits that blockchain has to be validated, and the validation generates the new currency reward and therefore injects more capital back into the ecosystem of the currency. So mining Bitcoin is a very computer-intensive effort. It used to be when I started playing with Bitcoin, I could do it with a spare laptop in a bedroom. Those days are long gone. Now you need custom-built, what they call ASIC or application-specific integrated circuitry. You need absolute custom-built machines. And most of those machines were made by a company out of China called Bitmain. Well, back in 2017, I believe, there was an interesting hacker in the United States who took the firmware of the Bitmain mining hardware and he disassembled it. He brought the code that ran the machine back into its source code so he could analyze it, and he did exactly that. And what he discovered was that it had inside of its code specific routines that said that if this Bitcoin miner was located in the People's Republic of China, and particularly in a Bitmain data center, it has a performance boost, and that performance boost would mean that the Bitmain mining equipment would mine the coins faster than anybody else. Meanwhile, they were selling these things off the truckloads out to everybody else in the rest of the world, but Bitmain were getting the majority of the mining rewards. When I saw that happening, I looked at the percentage of mining that was done around the world, and at the time it showed somewhere in the vicinity of about 72% was done in mainland China. So yeah, quantum computing could come in and disrupt it because now you've got a better miner. But what could also disrupt it is one of those 51% attacks. And that is that if the miners come together to agree on what the truth of things are on the blockchain, then they control things. And when 72% of that is done in mainland China, you can see yet another reason why people are very, very concerned about any actions that China may take. Because again, if they were to, for example, say, okay, Taiwan, you're one of us now, we're taking you by force, and the US go into the South China Sea with their fleet to try to stop this, China can very, very quickly and easily say, oh, you know that Bitcoin mining? Yeah, we got that. We got that. You got nothing now. We're shutting down that mining. Now, one could argue, well, that could all go and redistribute itself around to the rest of the world. The problem is the cost of power. They have subsidized power there for this. We don't. That's why Iceland became a major mining center. But at the end of the day, people started to move away from that. And that particularly came when the US SEC and FinCEN and all the US government agencies started looking deeply into what was going on in that region and started to penalize those that weren't completely transparent with US government regulations. That shut down so much of the Icelandic mining operations, and we're back into the world where China owns the mining world. So if you're putting your faith and trust in Bitcoin because somebody told you, look, you can do peer-to-peer transactions with it, firstly, it's going to take hours to complete those transactions. So don't even think about buying a cup of coffee with it unless you're on off-chain Lightning Network or whatever. So that's not going to happen. Second, the cost of the transactions, the mining fees, have been extremely expensive of late. Factor that into your overall cost of doing business here. And then the final part about it is, do you really want to put all your faith and trust in a currency that is 70% controlled by a communist regime? And if the answer to that is, well, it's good enough for Walmart, it's good enough for me, then buy Bitcoin. For me, it's a bridge too far.
Yeah. Whew, okay, so that was a different perspective that I've yet to hear about the Bitmain aspect and the code stuff. That's something worth considering. Now, last question. I'm curious now. The proof of stake work and all the privacy coins and all that other stuff that has come from that initial idea of a decentralized peer-to-peer transaction protocol, it's been expanded. They've grown it and they've added to it. Now, the other projects, are there any validity in those projects that might be something that can sustain and go around censorship or something in the future, perhaps?
Well, I am a believer in Monero, but I also would caution people before they go, let me look up what XMR is and let me look at Monero and so on, because it is a very good, solid privacy coin. I would caution people to understand that with anything like that, the responsibility of holding their private keys and holding their assets is on them. It's not on an exchange. There's nothing easy here. Unless you know the technology and you know how this happens, you could lose everything you got because you make a stupid mistake or your hard drive dies or something like that. And that's why I think that it's something that people should be very cautious about. They need to research very carefully, and they need to make decisions, because if you're involving a counterparty like Coinbase or Kraken or Uphold or something like that to hold your keys, you don't have control of your money. You need to hold your own keys, and that means you've got to take responsibility of understanding how to do that and what your care and feeding responsibilities are. It's kind of like buying gold. If you give it to a third-party vault, you trust the vault will look after you and they won't abscond with your money. If you really want to know how to do it, you buy a safe and bury it in the backyard and stick your gold in. But the reality is, when it comes to cryptocurrency, one hack, one broken hard drive, one lost computer, and you could be SOL with this stuff. So be very, very careful. You know what you're doing. And if you don't and you're trusting a counterparty, how is that any different to a bank?
Good point. Myles, Wakeham, I appreciate you for joining us. For those that might just be coming across you for the first time, let them know where they can find you at and give them information on what you're doing out in Mexico, and give them your social media sphere. I'll put a link to the video, but feel free to share where they can find you at.
Well, everyone can always find me over on the web at beunconstrained.com. That's my main website. I run a podcast there called the Unconstrained Podcast. I do it weekly, and it's an opportunity for people to see it on a contrarian's perspective on a lot of things that to do with life, the universe, and everything, particularly around money. So I would encourage people to check that out if they're interested, and they can find me on Twitter at beunconstrained. But I think that's the bulk of it.
Sounds good. Well, Myles, man, enjoy yourself down in Mexico. Definitely look forward to connecting with you again in future and find out more. Thanks for joining us on this RTD Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Hold on one second. I have to sign off. All righty, everybody. So I appreciate you for tuning in. Sorry about the audio side of issues I had. But anyway, it's fun to connect once again. Be back tonight for a live stream. So guys, show up and have some topics. Let's touch on some things. So other than that, be blessed, be safe. See you guys later. Peace.